If you allow me, how can this not be perceived as provocation or an escalation of tension in Europe?
Who would perceive it as a provocation or an escalation?
Russia.
Oh, Russia.
Cricket, what's the difference between a spin bowl and a double? No, I'm joking. I'm joking. The U.S. team has spin bowled their way into glory. They're in the team.
Yeah, congratulations to them. I saw
Yes,
that.
I just wanted to know
they're
what
in
your
the
message
Super
was.
8 now.
The Super 8, and they're
It's amazing.
facing the Proteas and then the Windies in the coming days. Does the president have a message for this unexpected success in a sport that is wildly popular everywhere else in the world?
We all congratulate them on this success. It's tremendous, and we're cheering
Do you
them.
have an update on the U.S.-built pier, the humanitarian aid pier that has been removed?
Removed?
That is undergoing repairs?
Because of severe weather that we talked about being a problem in the summertime here in the Eastern Med. I don't. You'd have to go to the Pentagon for a tactical update. As I understand it, they did have weather-related issues. They had to dismantle it for the safety of everybody involved, but I honestly don't know what the new status is. Now, a few days ago, the Houthis attacked the Liberian-flagged, Greek-owned and operated bulk cargo carrier merchant vessel Tudor, killing a crew member who hailed from the Philippines. The Tudor had just completed a port call in Russia and was bound for Egypt. She had nothing whatsoever, nothing, to do with the conflict in Gaza. They also attacked the Palawan-flagged, Ukrainian-owned, Polish-operated motor vessel Verbena, critically wounding a crew member from Sri Lanka. The Verbena had previously stopped in China, then Thailand, and was on her way to Italy. She, too, had nothing whatsoever to do with the conflict in Gaza. So just think about that for a hot minute or two. The Houthis killed an innocent crew member from the Philippines and critically wounded a Sri Lankan sailor who were guilty of no crimes, who were simply doing their jobs as professional mariners. They weren't delivering arms to Israel. They weren't taking sides in the Middle East. They were just manning their posts aboard ship, trying to earn a paycheck and keep global commerce moving. Like the ships that they sailed in, these two blokes had nothing whatsoever to do with the conflict in Gaza. Now, these most recent attacks, of course, come on top of numerous others in recent months, attacks which can and only rightly be labeled acts of terrorism against nations from around the world. Even the Yemeni people have fallen victim, as the Houthis have on one occasion struck a ship that was bringing grain to their own ports. These attacks also obstruct humanitarian aid to Sudan, where the needs are tremendous and the conditions desperate, and they impact commerce for every neighboring country in the Horn of Africa and the Middle East, from Egypt to Ethiopia to Jordan and Djibouti. The Houthis are causing needless suffering across the entire region for Gazans, for the Sudanese, for the Yemenis themselves. And as I said, this is pure terrorism. There's simply no other word for it. The Houthi claim of supporting Gazans is meritless in any case. Israeli ports are now open for the moving of goods directly into Gaza, and we are in the process of moving thousands of pallets from Ashdod into Gaza as we speak. The United States has provided thousands of metric tons of assistance to Gazans and will continue to do so. We are the largest contributor by far to date. The Houthis, by contrast, have not provided so much as a slice of bread to the Palestinians in Gaza. For our part, the United States will continue to ensure assistance is reaching Gaza in large quantities, and we will continue to act with partners around the world to hold the Houthi terrorists accountable for their actions. Today, as I mentioned at the top, Treasury will announce new sanction designations against individuals and entities that are involved in the Houthi weapons procurement network. We're going to continue to target this network to degrade the Houthis' ability to replenish its munitions, and we'll continue to target threats to international commerce when necessary, including taking another strike, as we did just last night, against an unmanned aerial vehicle that posed a direct threat to ships in the area. But I thought it was important to just provide a little context here. These Houthi attacks, they don't grab the headlines that they used to grab, but they're having an impact, and we are trying to have an impact on their ability. So their actions are truly reckless, beyond the pale. They talk a mighty good game, but their actions speak a hell of a lot louder. They don't care a whit about Palestinians in Gaza. And this isn't some principled stand they're taking. It's terrorism, as I said, pure and simple, and it has to stop. Now, as you know, the President will meet with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg at the White House later this afternoon to talk about planning for NATO's 75th Annual Summit next month in Washington. The President will reaffirm the ironclad U.S. commitment to Article 5 of the Washington Treaty and will welcome steps that allies are taking to support Ukraine. I expect the two leaders will also talk about the progress that NATO allies are all making on increasing their defense spending, which has more than doubled since President Biden took office. Quickly turning, if I could, to National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan's trip to India, where he met with senior members of the Indian government and U.S. and Indian industry leaders to expand key areas of cooperation between our countries today. In New Delhi, Mr. Sullivan will co-chair the U.S.-India Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technology, also known as ICET, a landmark partnership to expand strategic cooperation across key technology sectors, including space, semiconductors, advanced telecommunications, artificial intelligence, quantum technology, biotechnology, and clean energy. As the world's two oldest and largest democracies, the United States and India share a unique bond of friendship. Mr. Sullivan's trip will further deepen the already strong U.S.-India partnership to create a safer, more prosperous Indo-Pacific. And finally, I want to just briefly highlight the successful Summit on Peace in Ukraine over the past weekend, which Vice President Harris and National Security Advisor Sullivan both attended. More than 100 countries and organizations came together to discuss the importance of reaching a just and lasting peace in Ukraine, based on the core principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, the foundation of the UN Charter. As President Biden said on Thursday when he signed our historic bilateral security agreement with Ukraine, a lasting peace for Ukraine must be underwritten by Ukraine's own ability to defend itself now and to deter future aggression. So we're going to continue to provide military aid to help Ukraine defend itself on the battlefield, and we're going to continue to support the Ukrainian people, including through the new funding that Vice President Harris announced to repair Ukraine's energy infrastructure, and through new funding for humanitarian aid and assistance to support Ukrainians who have been displaced from their homes and from their lives. With that, thank you for your patience. We'll take some questions. Thanks.
Can you give us your response to Prime Minister Netanyahu's move to disband his war cabinet? You know, he seems to think that there's no need for an extra branch of government, as it was described to us. Do you agree that the war cabinet isn't necessary right now?
Well, that's really up to the Prime Minister to decide, Mary. This is the war cabinet was an internal domestic measure taken by the Prime Minister to better advise and provide him counsel on the war. We said at the time that we believed it was a worthwhile step, and we still hold by that. But with Mr. Gantz's decision to leave, I'm not sure that Prime Minister Netanyahu was left with a whole lot of other choices.
And more broadly speaking, how concerned is the president right now that far-right voices in the Israeli government may wield more power?
That's going to be up to Israeli leaders, and that's going to be up to the Prime Minister. We deal with the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is the elected head of the Israeli government. That's who the president deals with. He will continue to do so. They don't agree on everything. They're not going to agree on everything going forward, but they have a long relationship with one another, and they know that they both have an open line to one another. So we're going to leave it at that.
Thanks. Could you comment at all on Putin's trip to North Korea and the possibility that there's going to be a partnership agreement signed?
Yeah, look, no surprise that he went to North Korea after his so-called election. A real nail-biter that was. He was going to go on a little bit of a charm offensive here, and that's what he appears to be doing. We're not concerned about the trip. What we are concerned about, Trevor, is the deepening relationship between these two countries. Not just because of the impacts it's going to have on the Ukrainian people, because we know North Korean ballistic missiles are still being used to hit Ukrainian targets, but because there could be some reciprocity here that could affect security on the Korean Peninsula. Now, we haven't seen the parameters of all that right now. Certainly haven't seen it come to fruition, but we're certainly going to be watching that very, very closely.
And do you have any comments on this apparent collision between the Chinese and the Philippines?
In the Philippines, yeah. You're talking about the second Thomas Shoal. Yeah, these are troubling reports because it appears as if, and just from initial operational reports that we've gotten, that at least one Philippine sailor was wounded. I mean, you talk about collisions and water cannons, and you don't think about the damage that can do to the human body, but let me tell you something, it can. And so we're deeply concerned about the injuries suffered by this Philippine sailor, obviously wishing him the best in terms of his recovery. But more critically, to your question, this kind of behavior is provocative, it's reckless, it's unnecessary, and it could lead to misunderstandings and miscalculations that could lead to something much bigger and much more violent. It's imperative that the rightful legal maritime claims by the Philippines are respected, by the PRC and by everybody else for that matter.
Admiral, has the President taken part in consultations about deployment of more nuclear weapons? Has Secretary General Stoltenberg referred to in an interview with the Telegraph?
Look, we're a NATO ally, and we talk to our NATO allies all the time about what readiness looks like, what posture needs to look like, and how we can all be better postured to meet our Article 5 commitments, the same commitments that the President's going to reiterate when he meets with Jens Stoltenberg later this afternoon. We don't talk about nuclear posture with any specificity, and I'm certainly not going to start doing that here from the podium. I'll just tell you that we're comfortable, as we have been comfortable, with our strategic deterrent posture, not only on the European continent, but around the world.
If you allow me, how can this not be perceived as provocation or an escalation of tension in Europe?
Who would perceive it as a provocation or an escalation?
Russia.
Oh, Russia. Russia, the same country that invaded Ukraine, which posed absolutely no threat to them. Look, NATO's a defensive alliance. And NATO countries are some of the most sophisticated in the world when it comes to military capabilities. And it would be irresponsible and imprudent if we weren't constantly talking to our NATO allies about how to make sure we can meet our commitments to one another across a range of military capabilities. And that's as far as I'll go.
John, former acting CIA Director Michael Morell wrote in Foreign Affairs today that the terrorism warning lights are blinking red again. Do you agree with that assessment?
Certainly, we would absolutely say unequivocally that we've got to keep our eye on the terrorist threat. Just in the recent week or so, AFRICOM took a strike on some ISIS leaders in Somalia. Now, we're still waiting for the actual battle damage assessment of that strike, but it's clear that the threat is still real, and we have to still go after it.
Given the fact that there are these concerns about the rising threat of terrorism, is the President considering raising the terror alert level? And if not, why wouldn't he consider
I'm
that?
not aware of any decision to change that. We're watching this like a hawk every single day. As I said, AFRICOM just in recent days took a strike, an airstrike against some ISIS leaders in Somalia. It's not something that we have ever stopped focusing on. I mean, as you remember, when we conducted the withdrawal from Afghanistan, we talked about sharpening over-the-horizon targeting capability, and you've seen that bear out now. Places like Iraq and in Syria, now in Somalia and other places. It's not something that we take lightly. It's not something that we aren't constantly trying to improve and sharpen. And we have not lost one bit of focus on the terrorism threat, either here in the United States or around the world.
In Jake's meetings in India, has the plot to kill an American Sikh activist come up at all? And do you expect that to be part of the discussions?
I don't have more to add on the conversations that Jake's having. He's still over there having these conversations, but the main focus of his visit, as I said, was to look for ways to deepen the U.S.-India bilateral relationship, particularly when it comes to emerging technology.
Bring this up.
I don't have anything more to add on the conversations.
Thank you so much. I have a question about China and then another on the cricket. Starting with
on
President...
the cricket?
On the cricket.
As in the game?
Yes.
Okay.
Starting with President Xi...
Yes, I just wanted to make clear it was a
Or the
bug.
singing insect, perhaps.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Let me know. Okay.
Sorry.
President Xi last year told the head of the European Commission, or the European Commission president, that the U.S. is trying to, quote, trick China into attacking Taiwan. This sounds awfully similar to some of the language that President Putin was using to justify his invasion of Ukraine. Do you think that Xi is taking a line from Putin's playbook? How concerned are you about it? Is this something that the two leaders have talked about?
It's bogus, for one. There's absolutely no truth to it. I can't get into Mr. Xi's head and figure out who's giving him his talking points or where it's coming from. It's just not true. What's your next question?
All right, on cricket, what's the difference between a spin bowl and a double? No, I'm joking. The U.S. team has spin bowled their way into glory. They're in the team.
Yeah, congratulations to them. I saw
Yes,
that.
I just wanted to know
They're
what
in
your
the
message
Super
was.
8 now.
The Super 8, and they're
It's amazing.
facing the Proteas and then the Windies in the coming days. Does the president have a message for this unexpected success in a sport that is wildly popular everywhere else in the world?
We all congratulate them on this success. It's tremendous, and we're cheering them on.
All right, let's keep going.
Thank you. At the G7, President Biden greenlit the limited use of U.S. arms by Ukraine. to strike targets across the border into Russia, but you clarified that nothing had changed in terms of long-range strikes inside Russia. So my first question is, can you say definitively that the president's stance on long-range strikes inside Russia by Ukraine won't change? And then second, when the United Kingdom gave Ukraine permission to use British weapons to strike targets inside Russia, Moscow responded by saying that they could hit British targets, quote, on Ukraine's territory and beyond its borders in retaliation. What would the president's response be if Moscow was to take that action against Britain?
Well, that's a hypothetical I don't need to worry about because the president's policy hasn't changed when it comes to long-range strike, use of long-range U.S. strike weapons into Russia proper. I also just want to correct something you said. You said he greenlit at the G7 this idea of cross-border use of U.S. weapons for cross-border imminent threats. That's actually a decision he made well before the G7.
So, but in terms of this Russian threat to potentially strike British targets on Ukrainian territory and beyond, what is the White House response to that type of rhetoric coming from Moscow?
My response to Mr. Putin is this. If you're so worried about becoming the victim of attacks, and you're worried about your troops' livelihoods and your military units, then get the hell out of Ukraine. You don't have any business being in there in the first place. That's my best advice to Mr. Putin.
Thank you very much, Kirby. Hi, John. So President Biden has sent an envoy today to Israel and Lebanon. How real, John, is the possibility that this war will expand to Lebanon? Do you believe? Do you think this the full war there is more real today, the possibility, than it was a few weeks ago? And do you believe that it's possible to de-escalate the situation, that the growing escalation tension without a ceasefire?
Look, I don't want to sound blasé about this. If we weren't concerned about the possibility of escalation and a full-blown second front there to the north, we wouldn't still be involved in such intense diplomacy. And Mr. Hochstein's over there right now. As a matter of fact, he's in Israel as we speak to have these conversations, and he'll follow that up with conversations in Beirut. So obviously we're concerned about this. We haven't seen Hezbollah jump in with 2 full feet here. They have been, of course, conducting strikes across that border. The Israelis have been defending themselves against that. We don't want to see escalation. We don't want to see a second front. And we are concerned about it.
Is the possibility more real today than 2 weeks ago?
That's a slide and scale kind of question that I don't think I'm really educated enough to answer. I mean, it's obviously still of concern. There continues to be exchange of fire across that border. And if we weren't concerned about it, we certainly wouldn't have sent Amos over there.
Thank you. First, thanks, John. To follow up on Mary, you said that the U.S. did think it was worthwhile to have the war cabinet in place. Now that it is no longer, does the U.S. believe it will be a detriment as Netanyahu makes decisions moving forward?
I think that remains to be seen.
And then secondly, do you have an update on the U.S.-built pier, the humanitarian aid pier that has been removed?
Removed?
That is undergoing repairs?
Because of severe weather that we talked about being a problem in the summertime here in the Eastern Med. I don't. You'd have to go to the Pentagon for a tactical update. As I understand it, they did have weather-related issues. They had to dismantle it for the safety of everybody involved. But I honestly don't know what the new status is.
Sorry. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said over the weekend that he had plans to meet with officials from Qatar and Israel while he was in Switzerland. Did he actually have those meetings, and is there any update you can provide on ceasefire hostage takeover?
I would just tell you that we have maintained communication with both Qatar and Egypt, and while I don't have any progress to report today in terms of where things are, we still believe this is a very live process, and these conversations are in fact being they're constructive, and we're hoping that we'll be able to get there. So yes, those conversations are happening.
Thank you. Hi, John. Can you update us on the talks being held in Jerusalem to prevent an escalation on the Lebanese border?
I'm sorry, can I?
There are talks like the U.S.
I already
Special
talked about
Envoy
that a little bit.
Houthi is in
I
Jerusalem.
kind of answered that question before when I talked about Amos initiative.
Yeah, but is it still your assessment that there won't be an escalation and that Hezbollah won't go far into this conflict?
If we were so sure of that, we probably wouldn't have Amos traveling over there. We're concerned about it, obviously.